Before this story begins, I need one thing from you in the comments, and I need it now, before the first scene. Have you ever been described, in public, by people who did not know you, and had absolutely no way to correct it? Where the truth was right there in your mouth, and speaking it would have cost somebody else everything? Tell me below. One line. I read every comment on this channel, and that is not a figure of speech. And if you're new here, hit that like button, subscribe, share this with someone who needs a story tonight, and comment where in the world you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. Because this story starts with a photograph. One photograph, taken at Incheon International Airport at 6:52 in the evening on a Thursday in September, by a man standing on a luggage trolley 200 meters away with a 400mm lens. It showed two people, a Korean man in a black suit. Seong-jae, 47 years old, chairman of Baekho Holdings, one of the most photographed men in South Korea and one of the least understood. And beside him, half a step ahead, a black American woman in her 30s in a gray blazer, with her right hand closed around his left elbow. That was it. That was the whole photograph. It ran the next morning under 4 words that would follow her for 14 months. The chairman's mystery woman. Nobody knew her name. That is the part one need you to hold on to, because everything that happens in this story happens inside that gap. For 14 months, a woman was on the front page of 11 publications in a country she had lived in for less than 2 years, and not one of them knew her name. They gave her others. They called her the chairman's shadow. They called her the American. They called her worse than that. In the comments, in 100,000 of them, in 2 languages, and I am not going to repeat those here. They wrote that she had been installed in an apartment in Hanam. They wrote that she had a monthly allowance and a car. They wrote about her body, at length, in publications that had editors. They ran a graphic, an actual graphic, comparing her to his late wife. And every single one of them was looking at a photograph of a woman doing her job. They did not know what her job was. She could not tell them. Not because of a contract, although there was one. Because of what would have happened to the man whose elbow she was holding if she had opened her mouth. She did not know, standing in that arrivals hall in September, that she would spend the next 14 months being the most publicly discussed private person in Seoul. She did not know her mother in Chicago would see her own daughter's face on a foreign newspaper website and have to sit down on the stairs. She did not know that a woman would throw a drink in her face in front of 140 people, and that the man she was standing next to, the man who knew exactly why she was there, would say absolutely nothing. She did not know that on a Thursday morning 14 months later, at 9:04, she was going to walk out of an elevator on the 41st floor of that building, past a secretary who tried to stop her, and into an office where a board of directors was waiting through the adjoining door. And she did not know what she was going to say when she got there. She worked that out in the elevator. Some stories end when somebody finally tells the truth. They end loudly. They end in a courtroom or a press conference or a confession, with the truth arriving like something dropped from a height, and everybody looking up at the exact same moment. And some stories end because one woman decides, on a Thursday morning, in an elevator, going up, that she is finished being described. That she is not going to be the thing they think she is, and that she is not going to be the thing he needs her to be, either. If you're here from the very beginning, type "nobody knew her name" in the comments so I know who was with me at the start. Now, let us begin. Naomi Reeves was 34 years old and had one of those professions that most people have never heard of and everybody has been saved by at some point without knowing it. She was a certified orientation and mobility specialist. What that means, practically, she taught blind and low vision people how to move through the world. Not in the way you are imagining. Not a cane and a crossing. Orientation and mobility is a discipline, and a hard one. It is spatial memory, route construction, echo and air current awareness, threshold recognition, stair rhythm, the sound a room makes when it is empty versus when it has 40 people in it. She had spent 6 years at a veterans hospital in Chicago. That is where she got extraordinary at it. Men and women in their 20s who had woken up in a hospital in a different life, who had been the most physically capable people in every room they had ever entered, and who now could not find a door. Naomi Reeves taught 1,100 people to walk into a room like they owned it. She was very good at the technical part. She was exceptional at the other part, the part nobody teaches, which is that most of what she was actually doing was managing a person's shame. because that was the real work. Not the cane. The shame. Her father had died when she was 9. Her mother, Vera, was a school secretary for 29 years in a building on the south side where every child knew her name. Her brother Odell drove a bus and had opinions about it. They were not a family that made a performance of anything. And in the spring, 3 years before this story, Naomi Reeves got an email through a specialist registry. Private client. Republic of Korea. 18-month contract. Compensation approximately 4 times her salary. Complete confidentiality. The client's identity would be disclosed after she signed. She assumed it was somebody's elderly father. She read the contract 11 times. She had a lawyer in Chicago read it. She talked to her mother about it for 3 weeks on the phone. She said yes because of the money. She has never once pretended otherwise, and I like her enormously for that. Her brother's daughter was starting college. Her mother's roof was 31 years old. She flew to Seoul in August. And on her second day, in a conference room on the 41st floor of a building with his name on it, she found out who the client was. Seong-jae was 47 years old and had been chairman of Baekho Holdings for 11 years. Baekho was a construction and logistics conglomerate. That was the front half. The back half was older. His grandfather had built the Baekho line out of a market district in the 1950s, and by the time Seong-jae inherited it, the ratio of legitimate to otherwise was roughly 70-30, and he had spent a decade pushing it toward 90. He was not a loud man. That was noted about him constantly, usually with unease. He was precise, extremely intelligent, and famous for a specific unnerving stillness in negotiation. His wife, Han So-yeon, had died 4 years earlier. Pancreatic. 11 weeks from diagnosis. They had no children. And 19 months before the photograph at Incheon, at a routine appointment he almost canceled, Seong-jae was told he had a hereditary degenerative retinal condition and that he was going to lose his sight. Not immediately. Progressively. Peripherally first, then the center. He was told the name of it, and he already knew the name of it, because he had watched his own father go blind from the same thing between the ages of 51 and 58. And he had watched what the men around his father did about it. His father was removed. Not killed. Removed, which in that world is a longer word. Stripped, sidelined, walked out of every room he had ever been welcome in by men who had knelt to him 10 years earlier, and left in an apartment in Bundang for the last 4 years of his life, where almost nobody came. Seong-jae was 19 when it started. He was 23 when it finished. So when a doctor said the words to him at 45, Seong-jae did not think about his sight. He thought about a room in Bundang. He told 4 people. His doctor. His lawyer. A private consultant in Singapore. And then, eventually, after 14 months of walking into furniture in his own home and pretending he had misjudged a step, and one genuinely terrifying evening on a staircase in Busan with 6 of his own men watching, he hired a specialist from Chicago through a registry on an 18-month contract with a confidentiality clause that his lawyer described as the most aggressive he had ever drafted. He did not tell his sister. He did not tell his vice chairman. He did not tell a single person in the organization his grandfather built. He told a stranger from Chicago, because a stranger from Chicago was the only person on earth who could not use it. Comment, he told a stranger, if you already see the shape of this. Naomi Reeves sat in that conference room and listened to a man explain that he was going blind and that nobody could ever know. She has said since that her first reaction was entirely professional, and her second was, "This is the loneliest thing I have ever been told." She asked her standard questions. Field loss, current acuity, night function, progression rate, what he could still do in good light. He answered like a man reciting someone else's medical file. Then she asked the question that is not on any form, the one she had asked 1,100 veterans in Chicago. Who in your life already knows? And Seong-jae, chairman of Baekho Holdings, said, "You." Naomi put her pen down. Then she told him what she was going to need, and she did not soften it, because softening it is how people get hurt. She said the work was going to require his hands and his time and his humiliation, in that order. She said he was going to have to walk into walls in front of her, deliberately, hundreds of times. She said he was going to have to be worse at something than he had been at anything since he was a child, in a room with a woman he did not know, and that if he could not tolerate that, the contract was a waste of both their lives. And she said the thing that decided it. She said, I've done this with men who used to jump out of helicopters. Every one of them thought they were the exception. None of them were. You're not either. Nobody had spoken to Nam Seong-jae like that in 11 years. He signed the amendment she asked for the same afternoon. And 2 weeks later they began the actual work, which is where this story becomes something other than a scandal. I want to tell you what Naomi Reeves actually did for 14 months, because the entire country got it wrong, and you are not going to. She built him a world out of memory. Every room he had to enter, she entered first. Alone, days before, with a measuring tape and a notebook and a phone camera. The banquet hall at the Shilla, 41 steps from the north entrance to the head table, a 2-centimeter lip at the carpet edge, chandelier hum that sits above and slightly left, so you can orient by sound. The lobby of the Baekho building, 11 steps from the car door to the first threshold, a change from stone to marble you can feel through a shoe sole, security gate on the right, so you keep right. The National Assembly reception rooms. 9 hotel ballrooms. For airports. The staircase in Busan. His own office. The route from the elevator to his own chair. She wrote them all down. 206 rooms in 14 months. Then she taught him to walk them. At night, mostly. Empty buildings, 2 in the morning, over and over. A man in his 40s in shirt sleeves counting steps out loud with a woman beside him saying again, for 206 rooms. And in public, she walked half a step ahead of him, on his left, with her right hand closed around his left elbow. That is the technique. It is called sighted guide. It is the single most photographed thing she did, and the most misunderstood. Because from 200 meters away through a 400-millimeter lens, a woman's hand on a man's arm looks like exactly one thing. From half a meter away it looks like what it is, which is a person telling another person, through 2 points of contact and no words at all, step down here, turn now, there are people to your right, the door is narrower than you think. She got so good at it that people who had known him for 20 years never once suspected. 22 months into his diagnosis, Nam Seong-jae walked into a room with the National Assembly's Transport Committee, crossed 40 feet of marble, found his chair, sat down, and negotiated for 3 hours. He could not see the far wall. Nobody in that room knew. Nobody in that room has ever known, until the day this story ends. And on the way out, at 6:52 in the evening at Incheon Airport, a man on a luggage trolley took a photograph. It ran on a Friday. Ha Eun-bai was 29 years old and had been at that publication for 4 years, which is a long time in a job that eats people. She was the one who wrote it. She has been extremely honest, since, about what she was doing. She was not investigating anything. There was nothing to investigate. She had a photograph of the most private, powerful man in the country standing extremely close to an unidentified foreign woman, and she had a headline, and the headline was going to do numbers. The chairman's mystery woman. It did 11 times the traffic of anything she had written that year. By Monday, there were 4 more photographs from 4 other agencies, because every long lens in Seoul was now pointed at Nam Seong-jae. By the end of the month, there were 60. And here is the thing that made it unstoppable. Every single photograph was true. Her hand was on his arm. She was always beside him. She traveled with him. She entered buildings ahead of him. She had been photographed at 2:15 in the morning coming out of the Baekho building with him, which was a mobility session in an empty lobby and which looked, in print, like something else entirely. There was no evidence to correct, because the evidence was all accurate. Only the meaning was wrong. And you cannot issue a correction about meaning. Baekho Holdings put out one statement, 11 words long, describing her as a consultant. It was treated as a joke. A satirical account made a t-shirt out of it. Naomi Reeves read the first article on her phone in a hotel room in Seoul at 7 in the morning with the curtains open. She has said her first thought was that they had spelled consultant correctly and got literally everything else wrong. Her second thought, and this is the one that mattered, was, I cannot fix this. Because there was one sentence that would have ended it in an afternoon. 11 words. I am an orientation and mobility specialist, and the chairman is going blind. And saying it would have finished him. Let me take you through what 14 months of that actually does to a person, because the montage version is a lie. Day 11. Her face is no longer blurred. A publication decides she is a public figure by virtue of being photographed. There is no process for this. It simply happens. Day 34. An entertainment program runs a 4-minute segment. 2 panelists speculate about her body. A third does an impression of her walking. Day 61. Somebody finds her professional registry listing, and instead of reading what it says, uses it to establish that she has no business qualifications, and therefore cannot possibly be a consultant, and therefore is obviously something else. Her actual credential is right there in the listing. Nobody clicks it. Day 88. Her name still is not published. For legal reasons, and because at this point Mystery Woman is a brand and her name would ruin it. She is, in the 4th largest media market on Earth, a person with no name and a nickname. Day 96. Her hotel is identified. She moves. Day 103. A man follows her into a convenience store in Yongsan and films her for 90 seconds while she buys water. 200,000 views. She stands there and lets him, because reacting is the content. Day 140. Her brother Odell, in Chicago, gets his 4th phone call from a foreign number at 3 in the morning and changes his number. He does not tell his sister for 2 months. Day 171. Her mother's church has a conversation about it. Somebody at that church prints a page out and brings it to the house, kindly, to make sure Vera knows. Day 194. She stops calling home on Sundays. Not because of anything her mother said. Because her mother had started saying, "Are you eating?" in a voice that meant something else, and Naomi could not carry that and the rest of it in the same week. And through every one of those 200 days, she was working. 206 rooms. Night sessions in empty lobbies. 6 flights a month. A man learning to count marble and getting better at it and standing straighter in rooms because of it, while the entire country decided what she was and said it out loud. She never once broke the confidentiality clause. Not to a reporter, not to her mother, not to her brother, not to the friend from Chicago who called her and asked, straight out, if she was okay. She said, "I'm working." Type 200 days if you have ever had to hold something you could not put down. The 4th anniversary of Han So-yeon's death fell in March. Nam Seong-jae went to the memorial, as he had every year, at a temple in Gyeonggi-do with about 60 people present, most of them her family. It was outdoors, uneven stone, wet, 19 steps down to the lower court, which is the exact kind of surface that ends people in his condition. Naomi Reeves walked half a step ahead of him on his left with her right hand around his left elbow. There were 3 photographers on the road above with long lenses. The photograph that ran was taken as he stepped down onto the lower court, his head slightly bowed, her hand on his arm, her body angled to block his right side where his field was worst. The caption said he had brought her to his wife's memorial. The reaction to that was the worst 3 days of the entire 14 months, and it was not close. Because up to that point she had been a scandal, and after that she was a moral event. Columnists who had never mentioned her wrote about respect for the dead. His late wife's cousin gave an interview. The number of messages Naomi received that day, on a private account, in 2 languages, was in 5 figures, and she could not say the sentence. He would have fallen down 19 wet steps in front of 60 people and his wife's entire family, and by that evening every man in the Baekho line would have known, and by the end of the month he would have been in an apartment in Bundang. She sat in a hotel room in Seoul on the 3rd night and did the arithmetic that she had been avoiding for 8 months. She was protecting a man's dignity by allowing the destruction of her own, and she had agreed to it. That was the part she could not get past. Nobody had done this to her without her consent. She had signed a contract and read it 11 times, and the contract was being honored perfectly by everyone involved. The problem was not that anybody was breaking the deal. The problem was that she had made one. Now I have to tell you about the night in May, because this is where the story turns, and it turns on something he did not do. A charity gala at a hotel in Yonggu. 140 people. Baekho Holdings was the principal sponsor, and Nam Seong-jae was expected to speak. Naomi had walked that ballroom 4 days earlier. 31 steps from the side entrance to the table, riser on the left with a 9-centimeter step, microphone at head height. 2 low tables that would not be there when she measured, and would be there on the night. She got him to the table. She got him through the speech. He was good. He was always good, and nobody watching had the faintest idea he could not see the back half of the room. And afterward, standing near the table, a woman came across the floor with a glass in her hand. Nam Jeong was 39 years old. She was Seong-jae's younger sister. She had adored Han So-yeon. She had spent 14 months watching her dead sister-in-law's memory used as a punchline in the same articles as this woman's body, and she had drunk enough that night to stop managing it. She said a word to Naomi Reeves that I am not going to say on this channel. She said it loudly, in Korean, and then again in English, so there could be no ambiguity about who it was for. And then she threw her drink in Naomi's face. 140 people. At least 11 phones. Naomi Reeves stood absolutely still with wine running off her jaw and down the collar of a borrowed dress. And she did not raise her hands, and she did not say a word, and she did not look away from Ji-young's face. And beside her, half a meter away, close enough to feel her flinch through the arm she was still holding, stood Nam Seong-jae. Who knew? Who knew everything? Who had one sentence that would have ended it in front of 140 witnesses? And who said nothing? He stood there and let his own sister do that to the woman who had spent 14 months making sure he never fell down in public, because saying the true thing in that room would have been the end of him. He knew that. He chose it. In about 2 seconds. I am not going to defend him, and I am also not going to let you pretend it was simple, because if he had spoken, every single thing his father lost he would have lost by Monday. Both of those are true. Neither one was standing in that ballroom with wine in her eyelashes. She flew home the next week. For days. She told nobody at Baekho where she was going. Vera Reeves opened the door of a house on the south side of Chicago and looked at her daughter's face and did not ask a single question for 11 hours. That is a mother. They sat in that kitchen on the second night and Naomi told her nothing. No details, no name, nothing that broke the contract, because she was not going to break it even in that kitchen. What she said was, "Mama, I can't tell you what it is. I can tell you I haven't done one thing I'm ashamed of." And Vera Reeves said, "I know that. I raised you." Then she said the sentence that ended 14 months. She said, "But baby, when did you decide that the way you get to be good is by letting people be wrong about you?" Naomi did not have an answer. Her mother kept going, because mothers do. She said, "You've been carrying somebody's secret. That's fine. Some secrets are worth carrying. But you didn't agree to carry his shame too. And that's what you've been doing. His shame is the reason you can't speak. Not his eyes." And there it was. Because that was true, and Naomi had known it professionally for 6 years and had somehow never once applied it to herself. She had spent her entire career telling people that the disability was not the problem. The shame was the problem, and the shame was optional. And the work was learning to enter a room without apologizing for the way you entered it. She had said it to 1,100 veterans in Chicago. She had never once said it to Nam Seong-jae. Because he was paying her. Because he was frightening. Because there was an apartment in Bundang in his head, and she had decided it was not her place. She flew back to Seoul on a Wednesday. She did not sleep on the plane. And on Thursday morning, she went to the 41st floor. The board of directors of Baekho Holdings met at 9 on the second Thursday of every month in the room adjoining the chairman's office. There were 9 of them. There was also Hwang Dae-ho, 58 years old, vice chairman, who had been photographing his own chairman's movements for 11 months and feeding them to 2 publications through an intermediary, not because he cared who the woman was, but because a man distracted by a foreign mistress is a man whose competence can be questioned, and Hwang Dae-ho had been questioning it very patiently in very small rooms. He had not worked out the real answer. Nobody had. He was 4 weeks from a vote. Naomi Reeves came out of the elevator at 9:04 in the morning wearing her own clothes, gray blazer, flat shoes, hair pulled back, an unremarkable canvas bag, and walked past a secretary who stood up and said her name with a question mark on the end of it, and did not stop. She opened the chairman's door and shut it behind her. Nam Seong-jae was standing at the window with his back to the room, which was where he stood when he wanted to look like he was looking at something. She said his name. He turned around, and he did the thing she had taught him, located her by voice, adjusted, centered her in what he had left. And Naomi Reeves put 3 things on his desk. The first was her resignation. 1 page. Effective immediately. The second was a ring binder, for centimeters thick, 206 rooms, hand-measured, hand-drawn, cross-referenced, every threshold and step count and sound cue in 14 months of work. Everything he needed to keep doing what he had been doing, without her. The third was the photograph from the memorial in March. Then she said this, and I want you to hear it the way she said it, which was quietly, and without 1 degree of heat in it. She said, I'm not going to be the thing they think I am. And I'm not going to be the thing you need me to be either. Those are the same decision, and I've made it. She said, you're going to walk through that door and tell 9 people that you are going blind. Not because it's brave, because it's true, and because you've been paying me for 14 months to help you hide from a room, and I'm not qualified for that. I'm qualified to teach you to walk into one. And then she said, tell them today, or I will. He said, you signed a contract. And Naomi Reeves said, I did. Sue me. I'll be in the papers anyway. Type tell them today, if that is the exact moment this became your favorite part. He stood there for a long time. She has said it was about 90 seconds, which in a room that size is close to unbearable. And what she has said about it since is that she watched a 47-year-old man have the single loneliest thought of his life, which was the realization that the person telling him to do the most dangerous possible thing was the only person in the building who was not going to profit from it either way. Then Nam Seong-jae said one sentence. He said, come in with me. She said no. She said, you have to walk in there by yourself. 31 steps, threshold at 11, chair on the far left. You know the room. You've known it for a year. He went in alone. Naomi Reeves stood in that office and looked at the closed door, and she has said she did not feel triumphant even slightly. She felt sick. She had just put a man she was responsible for into the room where his father had been destroyed, deliberately, on purpose, on a Thursday morning. What happened in there took 19 minutes. He did not make a speech. He was not eloquent, apparently, which is unlike him. He said the name of the condition. He said the date of the diagnosis. He said how much of his field was gone, which was more than any of them had guessed, and he watched 9 faces do the arithmetic. Then he told them that for 14 months there had been a specialist, a certified professional, with a name, which he said, walking half a step ahead of him in every room he had entered, and that every photograph they had all seen and all discussed and none of them had asked him about was a photograph of a woman keeping him upright. And then he said the thing that made it real, because Nam Seong-jae was, whatever else, a serious man. He said, I should have said this in a ballroom in May and I did not, because I was afraid of this room. That is the actual disqualification, not my eyes. Hwang Dae-ho called for a vote before the end of the hour. Now the title of this video, because the second half of it belongs to her. Naomi Reeves did not go home and wait to see what happened. She went downstairs, sat in a coffee shop across from the Baekho building, and called Ha-eun-bae, the 29-year-old reporter who had written the original 4 words 14 months earlier, whose name she had memorized on day 1 and had never once contacted. She said, this is the chairman's mystery woman. My name is Naomi Reeves. I'd like to give you an interview. On the record, with my name, my photograph, and my credentials. Today, Ha-eun-bae has said that she sat down on the floor of a stairwell to take the rest of that call. They did it that afternoon. For hours. Naomi brought her certification, her registry listing, her employment history, the Veterans Hospital in Chicago, the names of 2 former patients who had agreed to speak. And she brought a redacted copy of the ring binder, 206 rooms, step counts, thresholds, sound cues, in her own handwriting, 14 months of it. Ha-eun-bae looked at that binder for a long time and then asked the only question that mattered, which is why I have any respect for her at all. She asked, why didn't you tell me in September? And Naomi Reeves said, because it wasn't mine to tell. It's his. He told them this morning. Now it's a story. It ran the next day. The correction cycle in that country took about 72 hours, and it was the most complete reversal in that publication's history. The entertainment program that had done the impression issued an apology on air. The satirical account deleted the t-shirt. The columnist who had written about respect for the dead wrote about something else that week and did not mention it. Her name was printed for the first time in 14 months. Not the American, not the mystery woman star. Naomi Reeves, COMS, Certified Orientation and Mobility Specialist, Chicago. She has said that seeing her own credential in print in a Korean newspaper was the only part of the entire 14 months that made her cry. Nam Jeong flew to see her 4 days later, sober, and sat across a table and said the thing she had to say. And Naomi listened to all of it, and then said one sentence back, which was, you loved her. I'm not angry about that part. They are not friends. They exchange messages twice a year. I am not going to give you a version of this where he kept everything. The vote went against him. 9 directors, and it was not close, and Hwang Dae-ho became chairman of Baekho Holdings on the 1st of the following month. The other half, the older half, the part his grandfather built in the 1950s, went in a way that was quieter and considerably worse, because organizations like that do not hold votes. They simply stop coming to you. By August, Seong-jae had a large apartment, a great deal of money, an intact reputation for the first time in his adult life, and no position of any kind. There was no apartment in Bundang. That is the part he did not expect. He had spent 28 years believing that the men around his father destroyed him because he went blind. And what he found out, at 47, in the 11 months after that Thursday, was that they had destroyed his father because he hid it, badly, for 4 years, while making decisions nobody could challenge. Seong-jae said it out loud, in a room, on purpose, and got voted out cleanly, and then kept every single person who had ever actually respected him. 6 of them still call him. He learned to use a cane in September, which he has said was the most humiliating fortnight of his life, and also the last time he was ever humiliated by it. He took the ring binder apart and rebuilt it himself. And in the spring, 11 months after a Thursday morning, Seong-jae, no longer chairman of anything, with no lens pointed at him in 6 months, with nothing on earth left to protect, got on a plane to Chicago. She was not expecting him. He did not call ahead, which she has told him, repeatedly, since, was insane. He had an address, a white cane, an interpreter he did not need, and a plan that fell apart within 4 minutes of landing. She was working. She had gone back to the Veterans Hospital. In a supervisory role she had turned down twice before Seoul and accepted in about 10 minutes after it. He waited outside for 2 hours. And when Naomi Reeves came out of that building at 5:10 on a Tuesday in June and saw a 48-year-old Korean man standing on a Chicago sidewalk with a folded cane in his hand, she stopped walking, and she laughed, out loud, once, the way you laugh when something is too absurd to process. Then she crossed the street. He said, "I'm not paying you." She said, "I know." He said, "I don't need help with the door." She said, "I know that too. I taught you." And then Seong-jae, who had been chairman of a conglomerate and head of an organization and the most private powerful man in a country of 52 million, and was now a man with a cane on a street corner 4,000 miles from all of it, said the only thing he had actually flown there to say. He said, "Take my arm anyway." For 14 months, every single photograph of that woman's hand on that man's arm had been a lie. 60 of them, in 11 publications. Described by 100,000 strangers who did not know her name. At 5:20 on a Tuesday in June, on a street in Chicago, a stranger with a phone took one that wasn't. Nobody published it. Nobody knew who they were. So here is my question, and I want the honest answer. 14 months. She could have ended it any day with one sentence. 1. And every day she chose not to, because the sentence belonged to somebody else. Would you have held it that long? Not what you wish you'd do. What you would actually do, on day 194, with your mother asking if you're eating. Type it below. I read every single comment, and I will read yours. And if this story stayed with you, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach the people who need it. Subscribe if you're new, because there is a story like this here every week. Share it with somebody who has been described wrongly by people who never asked. And tell me where in the world you're watching from. Country, city, 3 in the morning, on your break, I want to know. Because right now, somewhere, there is a person on a front page with the wrong story attached to their face. And somewhere else, there is a person who knows the truth and has decided that keeping quiet is the kind thing to do. It usually isn't. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end. I'll see you in the next one.